We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. Nick Beres here on a Monday. Vandy Professor Carol Ziegler is with us. We're talking about climate hazards out there and how they can affect us all when it comes to things like disease, health hazards that come into play with that. As we see, warmer temperatures in general year-round. I mean, gosh, in Nashville and how hot it gets, the heat waves, the drought, flooding, some of the natural disasters and the role they can play as we see more of them. The big one for me is, looking at the emergence of perhaps new illnesses. I mean, after COVID, it just freaks me out to think, there's going to be, anyone who doesn't think there's going to be something else that comes is naive. There's going to be others. We've already seen it with monkeypox, that seems to be hopefully controlled. But I mean, there's going to be others to come. We just have to be ready for it. Let's take a call from Sandra. Sandra, good morning. Hi, Sandra.
Good morning.
Hey.
To me, that seems to be a double-edged sword in regards to the climatic changes that are causing issues on our planet and trying to preserve nature, in its purest form. You talked about the green space with the trees and the grass and the plants.
Sure.
Well, with the climatic hazards, if anything occurs like a severe hurricane or a severe storm like a tornado, those things jeopardize our natural green spaces like the trees. I mean, if you have a severe tornado come through and knock out a significant number of trees, then that's affecting your green space. It looks like it's a double-edged sword. Either way you look at it, something's going to be compromised.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, you've seen it with some of the trees destroyed by the tornadoes. But I guess the idea is, I know some people who have cut down trees in their yard because they looked at them and said, boy, they could have a tornado that's going to land on my house. All right, I understand that. But what would you say the idea of green space is? You just keep at it. You keep at it and you build more parks and you put in more trees. Some may go down, but hopefully the end result is that we have less severe weather.
Absolutely. And I think 2 points to address what the caller shared. One is that, so I live in East Nashville. We have a sort of neighborhood park that was just, the trees were just demolished in the tornado. There was no standing trees. And I went back and walked through there a couple weeks ago, and it's really grown up. So nature recovers very quickly if we just kind of leave it alone. So that's one thing. And as it's growing, if you remember, as things are growing, they're taking CO2 out of the atmosphere. So that new growth is really beneficial. The other thing is, to your point about the power and trees, if you can afford it, and if you can put solar panels on your house, that eliminates that problem. I mean, you still could have damage from the tree, right? But you're not going to lose power. So I
mean, solar, and I love you say that. Okay, now we built a home about 2.5 years ago, and that was really our goal, to go solar if we could. But it's just not there yet. I'm by no means a pauper, but I'm not a millionaire either. I don't, we had a budget for sure. And we would have loved it, but it was just too expensive. Now, we put a very efficient roof on, one that's going to be energy efficient as best we could, and maybe someday can retrofit it with solar panels. But it's like electric cars and other things. They're just not there yet for the general populace to be able to afford, in my opinion.
That's true. I think there are a few companies. So there's one company called Energy Electives. I have solar panels on my home, and
do you? Oh, awesome.
That company installed them. But that company in particular also will install panels for low-income families. So I know they put panels on Brooklyn Heights Community Garden, that institution. So there are some good things happening there.
How does tell me a little bit about your panels at your house? I would say, did you have them installed? You had a roof already. This house you bought, and you said, well, okay, I'd like to have some solar panels on my house. And what the energy you get from that, how does it work? Does it work for you, or is it something that you give to the energy company and you get a rebate, or how does it work?
So it works for me. I have a battery too. So if you can get a battery installed, that helps. You can't sell energy back to the grid. They used to let people do that, but that's no longer.
Okay, I didn't know if all right, that's why I asked. And so you have a battery installed, you have it on your roof, and what does it power for you? What does it do?
It powers everything. So, and I still have a small bill, but it's cut my energy bill probably by 3/4 at least.
So you still have an electric hookup for what you need, but you have the battery, so the solar energy goes into the battery and you draw off that for most of the electronics that function in your house.
Yes, that's correct. But one thing that does, so when we think about long-term changes, though, one thing that does need to happen is we need to decarbonize the grid, right? Because even having solar panels, it's great, but as long as we're still pulling, like electric cars, right? They're great, but if you plug them into a dirty grid, we're still emitting. So ideally what needs to happen rapidly is we need to decarbonize the grid and then electrify the fleet of motor vehicles. And
so how do you do that? Just less dependence on coal, things like that?
Yes, not fossil
and how do you, and you replace that with what, larger fields of solar panels?
Solar,
wind. Water? Okay.
That's also out of my wheelhouse, but yes.
I know. So, but you had those, I'm just real curious. So you had those panels installed. You said, did it take long? Was it super expensive? Were there rebates? How did it work?
There are, so you can get a tax rebate
That's
at the
what
end
I
of the
heard.
year. Sure.
Meaning that if you're going green, that it can help a bit.
Sure. It is expensive.
Yeah,
but,
okay.
I just think it's really important, and
I think it's great.
Sure, yeah.
And so because of that too, I mean, if there's a storm that goes through your neighborhood, power lines go down, you still have power. It's almost like you have your own generator. It's not a gas generator, it's the battery.
The neighbors will come charge their phones.
I know.
At my home.
Is that right? Does it charge? Do the typical panels for you charge just? What if it's an overcast day, or how does it work?
So I asked that question. The engineer that put them in is Jason Carney, and I asked him, like, what if it snows? And apparently it doesn't really decrease the efficiency very much at all. Now, overcast day, you still will generate energy at night. Obviously, you don't. But it's really remarkable, the efficiency.
And these are attached on, I'm trying to get this in general so folks understand this, because it's a way to go. They're on your roof. Do you have to make sure there's no trees shading it, or does that matter? Or?
That's a question for the engineer.
But I mean, do you have trees over your house?
I have trees. And I mean, where he placed them, they're generally south-facing and east-facing. But
okay, let's see. Now again, that's something that costs. It would be great to have. That's one issue as we move forward dealing with this. There are some people that are in better position financially, especially, but equity is a huge thing moving forward.
Yes.
You were saying that the people who really suffer the most are the ones that are maybe doing the least to damage our environment, right?
Absolutely. So that's true globally. So the global south, right, people live very carbon neutrally, and they're being impacted the worst. And then just in Nashville, in our own zip code, and in my zip code, the people with the lowest carbon footprint, so they have the lowest emissions per household, they take the bus everywhere, they live very densely, right? They're also typically the families who may get their power cut off. They may not have access to air conditioning. And so when we have these hot days, they really are bearing the burden with their bodies. Okay,
so what's the solution there? I mean, it's financial, right? That's ultimately what it is. It's financial.
It is. And then there's this idea called co-benefits, right? So we have a lab at Vanderbilt called the Climate Health Energy Equity Lab that I started with two other partners. And so we're looking at ways to drive carbon offset dollars into those communities to benefit those families. So things like having access to free public transportation if it was electric and clean. Weatherizing homes is really beneficial for families. Having access to air conditioning, access to green space, access to community gardens, things like that.
Yeah, that's all good, and that's where they need the help. But the truth is, many of us who are not in their situation should do some of the things they're doing. Now, they're doing so out of necessity.
Sure.
They're probably carpooling more. They're taking public transit when it so works them. Everyone these days likes the independence of having their own car.
Sure.
We do not have a public transit system that, in my opinion, is super efficient here. We have the buses, and they do the best they can in the traffic flow, but we voted down a few years back the idea of mass transit.
We did, yes.
And it's only going to get more expensive.
Yes.
So as you look at the city, I know you're not a city planner, but you're in the healthcare field. It's just going to get more congested, and there's, you just wonder about the pollutants as everyone drives, and there's traffic that's crazy.
Sure, and the air quality. So as the temperatures get hotter, the air quality is impacted as well. And so thinking about people who have asthma, congestive heart failure, COPD, that really dramatically impacts them.
Yeah. So I don't know. I wish we had gotten light rail or something like that. Yeah. I mean, there are communities like Portland, Oregon, similar in size to us, but they put it in a long time ago, and it's fuel efficient. It gets them around, and it's electric, and it's cleaner, and you don't need to have a car to come downtown. Right now, the only way you can really get downtown is take the Music City Star if you happen to live outside in Wilson County to take that ride in. But the hours and all of that moving forward. So let's take a break. When we come back, I just want to get your sense of where we're going forward. It's good that they have this heat discussion study that they're working on, and you don't know when they're going to have the results of that for the city.
I don't, unfortunately.
But I think that's going to be fascinating to see as they target different areas. We'll take a break, be back with a few more calls, our final segment with our guest right after this.